Hi everyone, this is Yuda, an immigration lawyer. Today, I'm going to walk you through the requirements for getting a business manager visa in Japan. In recent years, more and more foreigners have been looking to get a business manager visa and move to Japan. If we look at the numbers, there were around 27,000 foreigners holding a business manager visa back in 2019, but by 2024, that number had jumped to about 40,000. That's a 145% increase. For comparison, the overall growth rate for all foreign residents during the same period was 122%, meaning the business manager visa has been growing at a faster rate than other visa types. Then, is getting a business manager visa easy? A lot of foreigners seem to think, if I invest money in Japan, I can get the visa, right? In other words, they believe as long as I throw in enough money, the visa will be mine. The truth is, getting a business manager visa is not that simple. It's actually one of the more difficult visas to obtain compared to other resident statuses. So today, I'll break down the key points of the requirements in detail. Stick with me until the end, and you'll have a solid understanding of what's needed and the different categories of business manager visas. Let's dive into the conditions and important points about the business manager visa. Here's what we'll cover. First, what exactly is the business manager visa, explaining the types of activities it covers. Then, what the requirements are, looking at correspondence to the status of residence and meeting the landing permission criteria. So, what is the business manager visa? The business manager visa is a status of residence for foreigners who want to manage or run a business in Japan. For example, if you set up a company in Japan and work as a representative director, or if you get appointed as the branch manager or factory manager of a Japanese branch of a foreign company, then you'll need a business manager visa. Then, requirements for the business manager visa. According to Japanese immigration law, you'll need to meet two main conditions. One, you need to correspond to the status of residence. Two, you need to meet the landing permission standards. Now, I'd like to explain the correspondence to the status of residence. The law defines it like this: engaging in the management of trade or other business in Japan, or being involved in administration of such businesses. So, let's break that down. 1. Management of trade or other business. This refers to activities like founding a company or working as a managing director. If you establish a company in Japan and become the representative director, or if you're hired as a managing director or a hired CEO, you're engaging in management. 2. Administration of business. This refers to being a branch manager or factory manager for a Japanese branch or subsidiary. For example, if the headquarters is in the US and you come to Japan to manage the branch here, you fall under administration. Now, when it comes to correspondence to the status of residence, there are two critical things you need to keep in mind. 1. You actually have to be involved in management or administration activities. 2. The business must have continuity. Let me explain in more detail. As you can see, from A, you must be actively participating in management or administration. Immigration will look closely at what you're actually doing. Then B, when an applicant is trying to start a new business, immigration authorities will specifically check whether the applicant is actually engaging in the management of the business, rather than just being a figurehead. Similarly, when someone is invited to join an already operating business as a manager or executive, the same principle applies. If the business is relatively small and there are other people involved in the management, immigration will compare the applicant's investment share and actual work responsibilities with those of the other managers. This is clearly stated in the examination guidelines. I understand it might still sound a bit confusing when you just hear it like this, but to put it simply, the applicant must be genuinely involved in the business's management or administration activities. For example, suppose someone applies for a business manager visa by becoming a director of their friend's company in Japan, just by investing some money, when in reality, their true goal is just to live in Japan and they have no intention of actually managing anything. Or suppose someone applies as a manager without doing any real managerial work. In such cases, they would not meet the visa requirements. In short, to be approved for a business manager visa, you must be genuinely and substantially involved in the day-to-day activities of running or managing the business in Japan. Fake managers or fake executives, people who just hold titles without doing real work, are not eligible. Immigration authorities will closely review the actual duties you intend to perform. So, for example, if you're setting up a new company and applying for a business manager visa, you'll need to prepare a detailed business plan that clearly outlines what kinds of activities you, as the applicant, will be doing and what kind of plans you have for the business. You'll need to submit all of that properly when applying to immigration. All right, moving on. Let's talk about important points regarding the eligibility for the status of residence. One key thing is that the business must have continuity. If it looks likely that the business could fail during your period of stay, meaning that your activities under the business manager visa would be interrupted, then immigration will not recognize you as someone who qualifies for the business manager status of residence. So, to get more specific, if you're applying for a business manager visa with a newly established company, obviously you haven't completed a fiscal year yet. In that case, immigration will judge your application based on your business plan and projected profit and loss statements. That means your business plan and financial projections need to be detailed and thorough. If they're not, you won't be able to get your business manager visa approved. Now, if you're applying with an existing company, immigration will assess the company's status based on its financial statements, basically how the company's been doing financially. More specifically, if the company's most recent financial statements show a positive surplus, meaning there's leftover profit, or even if there's neither surplus nor deficit, immigration will consider that there's no problem with the business's continuity. Now, from here on, there are some important points you need to be careful about. When you're renewing your business manager visa, there are certain cases where you need to pay special attention. If, in your most recent financial statements, you show a deficit, but you're not currently in a state of excessive debt, you can still proceed, but you'll need to submit a business plan and future earnings projections when renewing or applying for a visa. And if those documents, like your business plan, are sloppy or poorly prepared, immigration will likely deny your application. Next, if you have a deficit in your most recent financial statements and you are also in excessive debt, but you weren't in excessive debt in the previous fiscal year, then you'll need to submit an evaluation report about your prospects for business improvement. This evaluation has to be prepared by a professional expert like a certified public accountant, CPA, or a certified SME management consultant. Now, if you have a deficit and you are in excessive debt for 2 consecutive years, unfortunately, immigration will most likely not recognize your business as having continuity. In that case, your visa renewal application will very likely be rejected. Also, a little side note here, if in both the most recent and the previous fiscal years your business showed no gross profit, then as a rule, immigration will judge that your business lacks continuity. And honestly, that makes sense, right? In normal business operations, it's almost unthinkable that your sales revenue would be lower than your cost of goods sold. For example, let's say you're buying a Japanese-made pen. Japanese pens are really popular worldwide, and you're importing it to sell in China. Suppose you purchase the pen in Japan for 300 yen per unit. Normally, when selling it in China, you'd price it at 600 or 700 yen to cover costs like labor, shipping from Japan, etc., and still make a profit. But if your gross profit is 0 or negative, that would mean you're doing something like buying it for 300 yen and selling it for 150 yen, which obviously doesn't make sense from a business standpoint. So if that's the situation, immigration will most likely deny your business manager visa renewal. All right, next, let's talk about the landing permission standards. These are called the standards for conformity to landing permission requirements. And there are 3 main standards from number 1 to number 3. We're going to go through each one step by step. So first, standard number 1, this is about the office requirement. It says that your economic activities must be carried out at a single business entity and at a fixed location, meaning you must occupy a specific section or space. Plus, the production or provision of goods and services must be done continuously, using both personnel and facilities. Now, just hearing that might sound a little complicated, but simply put, you need to rent an independent office space, set up proper facilities there, and objectively prove that your business operations are actually being conducted there. So then the next question is, what kind of office setups are acceptable and what kinds are not? I'm going to explain it using circle, okay, cross, not okay, and triangle, depends. Renting a private office space in an office building, no problem at all. This is fully acceptable. Now, what about using your apartment as a home office, like living and working in the same room? In that case, it's not accepted. As I mentioned earlier, you need to have a separate independent space for your office. If your living area and your office are basically the same space, immigration will decide that it doesn't meet the requirement. That said, there are some cases where a home and office combination might be accepted. For example, if you have a detached house and the first floor is clearly separated as the office while the second floor is your residence, then it could possibly be accepted because the spaces are clearly divided. Moving on, rental offices. Recently, it's becoming more and more common to apply for a business manager visa using a rental office. If you're renting a private rental office, that's fine. But if you're using a shared co-working space where you just sit wherever there's an open desk in the morning and there's no private or fixed section, then that won't be accepted. Also, virtual offices, since they don't provide a real physical working space, using a virtual office is not acceptable either. Now, subleasing an office. Subleasing can be acceptable if you properly meet the requirements. However, most original rental contracts usually have a no subletting clause. So if you're subleasing, you'll generally need to get a written consent from the property owner. As long as you have that, it's fine. Finally, using a food stall or kitchen car as your office. That is not acceptable for a business manager visa. Immigration will not recognize that as meeting the office requirement. All right, moving on. The second condition we need to talk about is that the purpose of use stated in the lease agreement must be for business purposes. Earlier, I mentioned that a home office setup is generally not allowed. But for example, let's say you rent a separate room in a condo, separate from your own living space, and use that rented space as your office for your business manager visa application. That's totally fine. However, in many cases, regular residential condos state in the lease that the property cannot be registered for business use. So, if your lease agreement says the space is for residential use, then you won't meet the requirements for the business manager visa. That's why you need to check with the landlord. If they approve using the condo room for business purposes, you'll need to have the lease contract updated to clearly state that the purpose of use is business, not residential. Also, when you sign the lease, the contract should be under the name of your company, not your personal name. Now, the fourth point, you must have the necessary equipment to actually run your business. Obviously, you'll need things like a computer, a phone, maybe a printer, standard office equipment. Immigration does sometimes conduct on-site inspections during the review of business manager visa applications to make sure a real business is operating there. So it's very important to actually have your office properly equipped. All right, moving on to standard number 2, which is about the required scale of the business. Let's break it down. To meet this requirement, your business must fall into one of the following categories. In addition to yourself, the manager, at least 2 full-time employees who reside in Japan must be engaged in the business. Or the capital or total investment in the business must be at least 5 million yen. If you meet either of these, you're good. All right, let's talk about the first point, which is about hiring at least 2 full-time employees. Now, an important thing to keep in mind here is the full-time employees referred to must be either Japanese nationals, permanent residents, spouses of Japanese nationals or permanent residents, or long-term residents. In other words, if you hire a foreigner, they can only count toward the 2 employees if they have a visa with no work restrictions. For example, many foreign company employees in Japan hold visas like engineer, a specialist in humanities, international services, but those kinds of workers do not count toward the 2 full-time employees for business manager visa purposes. Now, moving on to the second point, this relates to the capital requirement. In the case of a kabushiki keisha, a corporation, the company's capital must be at least 5 million yen. For other types of companies, like gomei keisha, general partnership company, goshi keisha, limited partnership company, or godo keisha, limited liability company, the total investment must be at least 5 million yen. Again, you don't need both 2 employees and 5 million yen in capital. It's an either-or situation. You satisfy the requirement by meeting either one. There's a little asterisk note here. In practice, it's pretty common for the foreign applicant themselves to invest 5 million yen or more into the business. But it's important to understand this is a requirement related to the scale of the business, not necessarily about personal investment by the applicant. So, for example, if there's already an existing company that has capital of 100 million yen and you join that company as a director and apply for a business manager visa, do you personally need to invest 5 million yen? No, you don't. As long as the company's capital is over 5 million yen, the requirement is considered satisfied. You're not required to personally invest anything in that case. However, as I mentioned earlier regarding eligibility for the status of residence, you still have to be substantially engaged in real management activities. So if you're appointed as a director with zero investment and no voting rights, and you're not actually engaged in real management unless the company is fairly large, it would be very difficult to get the business manager visa approved. Now, one more thing about the business scale requirement. Even if you don't fully meet either condition, 2 full-time employees or 5 million yen in capital, you might still qualify if your business is considered to be of a comparable scale. So what exactly counts as comparable scale? For example, if your business has only 1 full-time employee, but you are investing funds equivalent to hiring a second full-time employee, then your business might be considered of comparable size. Generally speaking, it's expected that you would invest around 2.5 million yen toward hiring the second employee. So, if you're halfway between the employee and capital requirements, immigration might still recognize your business as meeting the standards under comparable scale. Another case, if a foreigner plans to start a business as a sole proprietor, meaning they are opening a business personally rather than through a corporation, and they invest at least 5 million yen into the business, then that business could also qualify under the comparable scale requirement. For example, if you are opening a restaurant as a sole proprietor and you've already invested 5 million yen into equipment and setup costs, then you could be eligible for the business manager visa under the comparable scale category. Now, moving on to standard number 3, which is the practical experience requirement. This requirement applies only if you are engaged in management activities, not if you're actively running your own business as the owner. In other words, if you're assigned as a branch manager or factory manager in Japan, you will need to satisfy this experience requirement. However, if you're actually running and managing the business yourself, this requirement does not apply. Now, more specifically, you need to have at least 3 years of practical experience in either business management or business administration. There's a little clarification about this. If you studied management or business administration at a graduate school, either in Japan or overseas, the time you spent in your academic studies can be counted toward those 3 years. For example, if you completed a 2-year master's degree in business at a graduate school, and you have 1 year of practical experience afterward, you would satisfy the 3-year requirement for the visa. All right, this will be the last part. A summary of the requirements for obtaining the business manager visa. First, to get the business manager visa, you need to meet what's called the eligibility for status of residence. Now, there are 2 really important points to be considered eligible. First, you must actually be engaged in running or managing the business. It's not enough to just have a title. You can't just be a so-called manager or president without really doing anything. For example, if you only acquire non-voting shares and become a director but don't actually manage anything, that doesn't count. You have to be genuinely involved. No pretend managers or presidents are allowed. Next, the business must have continuity. If it's an existing company, immigration will judge this based on your financial statements. If it's a newly established company, you'll need to prove the stability and continuity of the business yourself through a detailed business plan. And when I say detailed, I mean really detailed. If you just slap something together, your application will be rejected. So you need to be careful about that. And one more thing, you have to meet the landing permission criteria. So what are those? First off, there's the office requirement. You need an independent office space. And there must be actual people and equipment in place for business to be conducted continuously. Then, there's the business scale requirement. You have to meet one of the following conditions. Your business employs at least 2 full-time staff members who reside in Japan, or your company's capital or total investment is at least 5 million yen, or the business is of a comparable scale to these standards. If you plan to be involved in managing the business, you'll also need at least 3 years of experience in business management or administration. This applies even if you're, say, the branch manager or factory manager of a Japanese operation. 3 years of experience is necessary. All right, so those are the details about the eligibility for status of residence and the landing permission criteria. To put it simply, you have to satisfy both to get the business manager visa. People often ask me, hey, if I just throw enough money at it, I can get the visa, right? Or, I bought a property worth 100 million yen in Japan. Doesn't that mean I can get a business manager visa? Well, the answer is no, absolutely not. Just investing money isn't enough. As I mentioned earlier, you must actually be involved in real business management activities. If you only invest without being actively engaged in management, you won't get approved. The business manager visa in Japan is not something you can get easily. You have to prepare properly, set up a solid business plan, and only after immigration reviews everything carefully and is satisfied with your case will you be granted the visa. So if you're serious about wanting to work as a business manager in Japan, make sure you properly prepare before you apply. All right, that's all for my explanation about the requirements for the business manager visa. Thank you very much for watching until the end.